Dylan Perry's heart races as Nova, the untamed Lurian beauty, circles him like prey. The annual harvest festival on Luros grinds to a halt, alien and human onlookers frozen in shock. No one moves, no one breathes. All eyes lock on the spectacle unfolding in the town square. Moments earlier, Nova burst onto the scene astride a massive six-legged beast, scattering the crowd. Her wild, piercing eyes scan the throng until they lock onto Dylan. He steps forward, ignoring the urgent whispers of his fellow soldiers. "Stand down, Perry!" But Dylan can't look away from Nova's alluring form, lithe yet powerful, adorned with iridescent scales that shimmer in the alien sunlight. Nova dismounts, her claws leaving light scratches on her mount's hide. She prowls towards Dylan, nostrils flaring as she takes in his scent. Humans and Lurians alike back away, creating a clear circle around the pair. Nova's reputation precedes her. Violent outbursts, refusal to integrate, a force of nature unto herself. Dylan holds his ground as Nova approaches. Her razor-sharp claws trace the contours of his uniform, testing. He maintains unwavering eye contact, a bold challenge in Lurian culture. The tension crackles, electric. Then, in a lightning-fast move, Nova grabs Dylan and hurls him onto her beast's back. Before he can react, she leaps up behind him, powerful thighs gripping the creature's sides. With a guttural cry, Nova spurs her mount into action. They thunder away from the town square, alien forest looming ahead. Dylan's stomach lurches as they plunge into the untamed Lurian wilderness. The settlement's alarms blare in the distance, growing fainter with each powerful stride of Nova's beast. Back in town, Colonel Harding declares a state of emergency. "This could reignite tensions with the Lurians," he barks, face grim. "Assemble a pursuit team, but do not engage without my explicit orders. One wrong move could spark an interspecies conflict." As the humans scramble to organize a response, Dylan finds himself alone with Nova, deep in alien territory. His mind races. Is he her captive, her chosen mate? He knows his actions in the coming hours will determine not only his fate, but potentially the future of human-Lurian relations on Luros. The beast slows to a trot, entering a clearing bathed in the ethereal light of Luros's twin moons. Nova slides off, pulling Dylan down with her. He stumbles, regaining his footing on the unfamiliar terrain. Nova's alien eyes bore into him, unreadable. Dylan straightens, squaring his shoulders. Whatever comes next, he's ready to face it head-on. After all, he's the only one who dared to stand his ground when the wild alien beauty appeared. Now, deep in the Lurian wilderness, it's time to see where that daring leads. Nova's powerful beast thundered through the alien forest, its 6 legs carrying them deeper into the untamed wilderness. Dylan clung to the creature's back, his heart pounding in sync with each powerful stride. The bioluminescent flora cast an ethereal glow around them, transforming the landscape into a surreal, otherworldly realm. Hours passed, the forest growing denser and more alien with each mile. Dylan's muscles ached from the intense ride, but a thrill of excitement coursed through him. Finally, Nova guided her mount to a halt in a secluded clearing. As Dylan slid off the beast's back, his legs wobbled beneath him, unaccustomed to the extended ride. Nova dismounted with fluid grace, her iridescent scales shimmering in the soft light of Luros's twin moons. She turned to Dylan, her alien eyes holding his gaze for a long moment, before she beckoned him to follow. As they approached a rocky outcropping, Dylan's eyes widened in surprise. Hidden within the stone was the entrance to a vast cavern system. Stepping inside, Dylan found himself in Nova's private sanctuary. The air was thick with unfamiliar scents, and he realized with a start that Nova was unconsciously releasing pheromones. The effect was intoxicating, heightening his senses and intensifying his attraction to the alien beauty. The cavern walls were adorned with primitive Lurian art, depicting scenes of hunts, battles, and rituals. Trophies from Nova's exploits hung from natural stone shelves, alien skulls, iridescent pelts, and artifacts that hinted at an ancient Lurian culture. Nova turned to Dylan, her expression unreadable. She began to communicate through a series of chirps, clicks, and intricate hand gestures. Though he couldn't understand her words, Dylan's instincts told him what was happening. Nova had chosen him as a potential mate, and now he must prove his worth. Recalling his basic training on Lurian courtship rituals, Dylan steeled himself for the challenges ahead. Nova led him to a section of the cavern where massive boulders were stacked. With a fluid motion, she lifted one of the enormous stones, her muscles rippling beneath her scaled skin. Dylan approached a similar boulder, his palms sweating. Despite Luros's lower gravity, the task was daunting. Gritting his teeth, he wrapped his arms around the stone. His muscles strained as he lifted, a groan escaping his lips. For a moment, he feared he would fail, but with a final surge of strength, he hoisted the boulder off the ground. Nova's eyes widened, a trill of approval escaping her. Breathing heavily, Dylan set the boulder down. Before he could fully recover, Nova was already moving, leading him outside the cavern. They emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking a treacherous ravine. Without hesitation, Nova leapt across the chasm, her lithe form sailing through the air with impossible grace. Dylan's heart raced as he peered into the depths below. A fall from this height would mean certain death. Taking a deep breath, he backed up a few paces. With a running start, he launched himself across the gap. For a terrifying moment, he hung suspended in the air, certain he had misjudged the distance. His fingers scraped the far edge, and with a desperate lunge, he managed to pull himself up onto solid ground. Nova's expression was one of growing respect and intensifying attraction. But there was one final test to face. She guided Dylan to a nearby hot spring, its waters bubbling and steaming. Without warning, Nova submerged herself completely in the scalding liquid. Seconds ticked by, stretching into minutes before she finally resurfaced, seemingly unfazed by the extreme heat. Dylan knew what he had to do. Taking a deep breath, he plunged into the spring. The heat was overwhelming, threatening to scorch his lungs. His entire body screamed for air, but he forced himself to stay under. Just when he thought he couldn't endure another second, he burst to the surface, gasping and sputtering. As he climbed out of the spring, Dylan saw a new light in Nova's eyes. She approached him slowly, her aggressive demeanor softening. The air between them crackled with tension as Nova reached out, her clawed hand gently tracing the contours of Dylan's face. The moment was shattered by the distant sound of engines. Dylan's head snapped up, recognizing the rumble of human vehicles. The search party had found them. Panic flashed in Nova's eyes, and she backed away, hissing softly. Dylan's mind raced. He had come so far in gaining Nova's trust, in bridging the gap between their species. If the search party burst in now, all of that progress could be undone in an instant. But his duty, his loyalty to his fellow humans, could he simply abandon that? As the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, Dylan knew he had to make a choice. The fate of human-Lurian relations on Luros might hang in the balance. He looked at Nova, her alien features now more alluring than ever, then glanced back towards the forest where his comrades were closing in. Time was running out, and Dylan Perry had to decide where his true allegiance lay. Dylan's heart pounded as he weighed his options. The sound of the approaching vehicles grew louder, leaves and branches cracking under their weight. He glanced at Nova, her alien eyes wide with uncertainty. In that moment, he made his decision. "Nova, hide," he whispered urgently, gesturing towards the cavern entrance. She hesitated, her claws flexing, but something in Dylan's expression made her nod and retreat into the shadows. Taking a deep breath, Dylan stepped out of the cavern and into the clearing. He raised his hands, palms out, as the first vehicle burst through the tree line. Colonel Harding leapt out before it had fully stopped, his face a mask of concern and anger. "Perry, what in the hell is going on here?" the colonel barked, striding towards him. Dylan stood his ground, keeping his voice steady. "Sir, I can explain. I came with Nova willingly." The colonel's eyebrows shot up. "Willingly? Have you lost your mind, soldier?" "No, sir," Dylan replied, lowering his hands. "I saw an opportunity to learn about Lurian culture, to potentially improve our relations. I couldn't pass it up." Colonel Harding's eyes narrowed, scanning the clearing. "Where is she? The Lurian female?" Dylan's mind raced. "She's nearby, sir, but I need to ask you to hold off on any search. We've made progress, and a show of force now could undo everything." The colonel's fists tight, but he nodded for Dylan to continue. I propose acting as a liaison between our settlement and Nova, Dylan said, his words coming faster now. We could arrange a controlled meeting with representatives from both sides. It's a chance to foster real understanding. For a long moment, Colonel Harding was silent, his gaze boring into Dylan. Finally, he sighed. It's a risk, Perry. But given the alternative, he glanced at the armed soldiers emerging from the vehicles. All right, we'll try it your way, but I want daily reports, understood? Yes, sir, Dylan said, relief washing over him. As the search party prepared to depart, Dylan caught a glimpse of movement in the cavern entrance. Nova was watching, her expression unreadable. When the last vehicle disappeared into the forest, Dylan turned and walked back to the cavern. Nova emerged slowly, her posture tense. Dylan approached her, hands open, and began to gesture, trying to convey what had happened. To his surprise, Nova's wariness gave way to curiosity. She mimicked some of his gestures, adding chirps and trills of her own. Over the next few days, Dylan and Nova fell into a rhythm. In the mornings, Nova took him deep into the forest, teaching him Lurian hunting techniques. Dylan marveled at her strength and agility as she brought down six-legged prey with her bare hands. In return, he showed her how to start a fire, explaining through gestures and simple words the basics of human technology. As they worked together to prepare for the upcoming meeting, Dylan found himself increasingly drawn to Nova. Her alien features, once so strange, now fascinated him. The way her iridescent scales caught the light, the graceful arc of her claws, the intensity of her gaze, all of it stirred something deep within him. Nova, too, seemed to be warming to Dylan. She watched him intently as he spoke, her head tilted to one side. Sometimes, when he was focused on a task, he'd look up to find her studying him, her eyes roving over his distinctly human form with unconcealed interest. One evening, as the twin moons of Luros rose high in the alien sky, Dylan and Nova sat by a bioluminescent pool near the cavern. The delicate fronds of alien plants swayed in a gentle breeze, casting dancing shadows across the ground. Dylan was explaining the concept of music, humming a simple tune and tapping out a rhythm on a nearby rock. Nova leaned in close, her scales shimmering in the ethereal light. She placed a clawed hand on Dylan's chest, feeling the vibrations of his voice. Her touch sent a jolt through him, and he fell silent, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment they stayed like that, the air between them charged with tension. Then with a low trill, Nova closed the distance between them. Her alien lips met his, and Dylan's world exploded into sensation. Her scales were smooth against his skin, her strength both thrilling and slightly terrifying as she pulled him closer. Dylan's mind whirled with conflicting thoughts, the diplomatic implications, the biological differences. But his body responded of its own accord. His hands found the curve of Nova's waist, tracing the patterns of her scales. She let out a purr of approval, her claws gently raking down his back. Just as Dylan surrendered himself fully to the moment, a roar shattered the night air. Nova leapt back, her posture instantly shifting to one of aggression. Dylan scrambled to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. From the shadows of the forest emerged a massive Lurian male, his scales a deep, angry red. His eyes locked onto Dylan, and he let out another challenging roar. Nova hissed, positioning herself between Dylan and the newcomer. She spoke rapidly in her native tongue, her words incomprehensible to Dylan but clearly heated. The male Lurian, Cax, Dylan would later learn, responded with a series of sharp clicks and growls. He gestured aggressively towards Dylan, then beat his chest with his fists. Nova turned to Dylan, her expression a mix of concern and willpower. Through a combination of gestures and the few human words she had learned, she conveyed the gravity of the situation. Cax had challenged Dylan to a duel, a fight for the right to claim Nova as a mate. Dylan's mind raced. He was no match for a Lurian in physical combat, and a fight could destroy the fragile diplomatic progress they had made. But refusing the challenge could be seen as an insult to Lurian honor, potentially causing an even greater rift between their species. As Cax advanced, his massive form looming in the bioluminescent light, Dylan knew he had only moments to decide. The fate of human-Lurian relations and his future with Nova hung in the balance. Whatever choice he made would shape the course of events on Luros for years to come. Come. Dylan took a deep breath, steadying himself as he faced Cax's imposing figure. The choice was clear. He had to accept the challenge. I accept, Dylan said firmly, meeting Cax's gaze. Nova translated his words into a series of clicks and trills, her eyes wide with concern. Cax's scales rippled with satisfaction as he nodded, then gestured towards the forest. Through Nova's translation, Dylan understood that the duel would take place at dawn in a nearby clearing. As Cax disappeared into the shadows, Nova turned to Dylan, her expression a mix of worry and willpower. She grabbed his arm, pulling him back towards the cavern. Teach, she said in halting English. Fight. Throughout the night, Nova became Dylan's mentor in Lurian combat. The cavern echoed with the sound of their training, the clash of makeshift weapons, the thud of bodies hitting the ground, and Nova's constant stream of instructions in her native tongue. Dylan's muscles screamed as he attempted to mimic Nova's fluid movements. Lurian fighting techniques relied heavily on their unique physiology, their strength, flexibility, and natural weapons. Nova focused on teaching Dylan how to use his human agility to his advantage, showing him ways to evade and counterattack that played to his strengths. As the first light of dawn began to filter into the cavern, Nova handed Dylan a spear-like weapon. Its alien design felt awkward in his hands, but he gripped it tightly, knowing it might be his only chance against Cax's superior strength. They made their way to the clearing in silence, the twin moons of Luros giving way to the planet's rising sun. A small group of Lurians had already gathered, their scales shimmering in the early morning light. Cax stood at the center, his massive form casting a long shadow across the ground. Dylan took his place opposite Cax, his heart pounding. The Lurian spectators formed a loose circle around them, their eyes fixed on the unlikely pair of combatants. Cax wasted no time, lunging at Dylan with a roar. Dylan barely managed to dodge, the tip of Cax's weapon grazing his arm. Pain flared, but Dylan pushed it aside, focusing on Nova's lessons. The duel quickly fell into a brutal rhythm. Cax's powerful strikes forced Dylan to constantly retreat, using every ounce of his agility to stay out of reach. When Dylan did manage to counterattack, his blows seemed to hardly faze the larger Lurian. Sweat poured down Dylan's face as he narrowly avoided another of Cax's swings. His muscles burned with exhaustion, and he could feel warm blood trickling from several cuts. But he refused to yield, each time rising to face Cax again. As the fight wore on, Dylan began to notice patterns in Cax's movements. The Lurian's attacks, while powerful, were predictable. Dylan's mind raced, recalling Nova's lessons from the night before. In a moment of clarity, Dylan saw his opportunity. As Cax lunged forward, Dylan dropped low, using a move Nova had shown him. He struck at a specific point on Cax's leg, a weak spot in Lurian anatomy that Nova had emphasized. Cax roared in pain and surprise, his leg buckling. In one fluid motion, Dylan knocked the weapon from Cax's hand, sending it skittering across the clearing. Silence fell over the spectators as Dylan stood over Cax, his weapon poised for a final strike. Cax glared up at him, waiting for the killing blow. Instead, Dylan lowered his weapon and extended his hand to Cax. Enough, he said, his voice hoarse. This doesn't have to end in death. Confusion rippled through the crowd of Lurians. Cax stared at Dylan's outstretched hand, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, Cax reached up and grasped Dylan's hand. Dylan pulled him to his feet, and the two stood face to face, both breathing heavily. Nova pushed through the crowd, her eyes shining with a mix of relief and pride. She spoke rapidly in her native tongue, her words causing murmurs of surprise among the gathered Lurians. As Nova finished speaking, she turned to Dylan and took his hand. The gesture was clear to all present. She had chosen him as her mate. Cax, his posture stiff with wounded pride, inclined his head slightly towards Dylan. It was a grudging show of respect, but a significant one. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. Colonel Harding burst into the clearing, followed by a group of armed soldiers. He took in the scene with wide eyes, Dylan, bloodied but standing tall, hand in hand with Nova, surrounded by a group of awed Lurians. "Perry," the colonel said, his voice a mix of confusion and concern. What in the world is going on here? Before Dylan could respond, Nova stepped forward. To everyone's surprise, she addressed the colonel in halting English. Human brave, she said, gesturing to Dylan. Human good. We talk now. Colonel Harding's eyebrows shot up, but he quickly recovered his composure. He nodded slowly, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. Yes, he said. I believe it's time we talked. As the humans and Lurians began to gather for an impromptu diplomatic meeting, Dylan and Nova found a moment alone. They embraced, their bodies fitting together despite their alien differences. Dylan could feel the rapid beat of Nova's heart against his chest, a rhythm so familiar yet so strange. Nova, Dylan whispered, pulling back to look into her alien eyes. But before he could finish, they were called back to the group. The future of human-Lurian relations on Luros was about to be decided, and they were at the center of it all. As they walked hand in hand towards the gathering, Dylan knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Together, Dylan knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. As they approached the gathering, Colonel Harding motioned for Dylan and Nova to join him. The colonel's face was a mix of curiosity and concern as he surveyed the unlikely pair. Perry, I need you to explain what's going on here, Harding said, his voice low. And quickly. We've got a lot of nervous people on both sides. Dylan nodded, taking a deep breath. Sir, I believe we have an opportunity here. Nova and we've learned to communicate, to understand each other. I think we can use this as a foundation for broader talks between our people. Harding's eyebrows rose, but he nodded slowly. All right, Perry, I'm listening. Over the next hour, as the sun climbed higher in the Lurian sky, Dylan and Nova worked together to bridge the gap between their species. Nova demonstrated her newfound English skills, while Dylan used the gestures and vocalizations he'd learned to communicate with the other Lurians. Slowly, the tension in the clearing began to dissipate. As the impromptu meeting wound down, Colonel Harding made a decision. We need a proper setting for these talks, he announced. Something that shows our commitment to this process. Within days, a large open-air pavilion took shape on the outskirts of the human settlement. Its design blended human and Lurian architectural elements, a physical representation of the cooperation they hoped to achieve. As the structure neared completion, delegates from both sides prepared for the formal negotiations. On the day of the talks, Dylan and Nova found themselves at the center of attention. They were seated at the heart of the gathering, with Colonel Harding leading the human delegation on one side and a newly introduced Lurian leader, Chief Zorn, on the other. Chief Zorn was an imposing figure, his scales a deep burnished gold that spoke of his advanced age and wisdom. His gaze swept over the assembled group, lingering on Dylan and Nova with an unreadable expression. As the talks began, the underlying tensions quickly surfaced. A human delegate leaned forward, his face creased with concern. How can we trust the Lurians not to attack us again? We've all seen how aggressive they can be. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the human side of the pavilion. The Lurians bristled, their scales shifting colors in agitation. Chief Zorn clicked his mandibles, his voice translating through the devices the humans wore. And how can we trust that humans will not continue to encroach on our lands, destroying our way of life? The pavilion erupted in a cacophony of angry voices and trills. Dylan felt Nova tense beside him, her claws digging into the arms of her seat. He knew he had to act. Standing, Dylan raised his voice above the din. Please, everyone, let's remember why we're here. As the noise subsided, all eyes turned to Dylan. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment. I've lived among the Lurians, he began. I've hunted with them, learned their ways. And yes, I've fought them too. But what I've discovered is that we're not so different. He gestured to Nova, who stood to join him. Nova and I have bridged the gap between our species. We've learned to communicate, to understand each other. If we can do it, so can all of us. Nova nodded, adding her voice to Dylan's. Humans, not enemy, she said, her English halting but clear. Different, yes, but not bad. We learn together. As Dylan and Nova spoke, sharing their experiences and the potential they saw for cooperation, the atmosphere in the pavilion began to shift. The hostility gave way to curiosity, then to cautious optimism. Just as it seemed progress was being made, a commotion erupted at the edge of the gathering. A group of armed humans burst into the pavilion, weapons raised. "This ends now," shouted their leader, a man Dylan recognized as Sergeant Vance. "We won't let aliens take our world." Chaos erupted. Lurians leapt to their feet, hissing and clicking in alarm. Human delegates scrambled for cover, but Dylan and Nova reacted instinctively, moving as one. Dylan positioned himself between Vance's group and the Lurian delegates, his hands raised. "Vance, stand down! You're going to ruin everything!" Nova, meanwhile, sprang into action. With lightning speed, she disarmed two of Vance's men, her movements a blur of scales and claws. The weapons clattered to the ground, and the would-be attackers stared at her in shock. Colonel Harding stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Sergeant Vance, lower your weapon immediately. That's an order." Vance hesitated, his eyes darting between Harding and the Lurians. For a moment, it seemed he might defy the order, but then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. "Sir," Vance said, his voice strained, "we can't trust these aliens. They'll turn on us the first chance they get." Harding's gaze was steel. "The only one turning on anyone here is you, Sergeant. You're under arrest for attempting to sabotage a diplomatic mission." As Harding's men took Vance and his followers into custody, an uneasy quiet fell over the pavilion. Dylan turned to find Chief Zorn watching him intently. "You protected us," Zorn said, his voice a low rumble. "Even against your own kind." Dylan nodded. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because I believe we can find a way forward together." Zorn's scales rippled, reflecting the sunlight in a dazzling display. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "there is more to humans than we first thought." As the talks resumed, there was a new energy in the air. The failed attack had paradoxically brought the two sides closer together. They had faced a common threat and emerged united. As night fell and the first day of negotiations concluded, Dylan and Nova found themselves alone for the first time since the morning. They stood at the edge of the clearing, looking out over the alien landscape of Luros. "Nova," Dylan said softly, turning to face her, "I never imagined any of this when I first came to Luros. But now," he trailed off, overwhelmed by the enormity of their situation. Nova's clawed hand found his, her touch gentle despite her alien strength. "We face together," she said, her English improving with each passing day. "For our peoples. For us." Dylan nodded, drawing her close. As they stood there bathed in the light of Luros's twin moons, he knew that their journey was not nearly finished. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges they could scarcely imagine. But as he held Nova in his arms, feeling the steady beat of her alien heart against his chest, Dylan felt ready to face whatever might come. The fate of two worlds rested on their shoulders, a weight both terrible and exhilarating. As they turned back towards the human settlement, Dylan and Nova moved as one, ready to face the next phase of their unprecedented journey. As the sun rose on a new day, Dylan and Nova found themselves thrust into the heart of a groundbreaking initiative. The success of the initial talks had sparked a desire for deeper integration between humans and Lurians, and the newly formed cultural exchange program was to be their brainchild. Colonel Harding approached them as they stood outside the pavilion, his face etched with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Perry, Nova, we need you two to spearhead this program. You've already bridged the gap between our species. Now, we need you to help others do the same." Dylan glanced at Nova, seeing his own mix of excitement and trepidation mirrored in her alien features. "We'll do our best, sir," he said, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Their first task was to organize a human-style festival in Lurian territory. As they set to work, Dylan found himself constantly amazed by Nova's ability to navigate the complexities of both cultures. She moved effortlessly between the human and Lurian communities, her improving English and natural charm smoothing over potential conflicts. One afternoon, as they were setting up food stalls in a Lurian clearing, Dylan paused to watch Nova explain the concept of cotton candy to a group of bewildered Lurians. Her gestures were animated, her voice a mix of clicks and English words. The Lurian scales shifted in patterns of curiosity and amusement. It's like a sweet air, Nova was saying, her mandibles clicking in concentration. Melts in mouth. Very human. Dylan couldn't help but smile. He approached the group, carrying a stick of the brightly colored confection. Here, he said, offering it to the nearest Lurian. Try it. The Lurian hesitated, then reached out with a clawed hand. As the sugar dissolved on its tongue, its scales rippled in a cascade of vibrant colors, the Lurian equivalent of wide-eyed wonder. The festival itself was a whirlwind of activity. Humans and Lurians mingled, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. The air was filled with the sounds of earth music mixed with the harmonic trills of Lurian song. Dylan found himself teaching a group of young Lurians how to play frisbee, while nearby, a human child was learning the intricate finger movements of a Lurian game. As the event wound down, Chief Zorn approached Dylan and Nova. His golden scales gleamed in the fading light. This festival, he said, the unfamiliar word rolling off his tongue, has shown us much about humans. Now it is time for humans to learn of us. The chief's proposal of a traditional Lurian coming-of-age ceremony in the human settlement was met with excitement and apprehension in equal measure. Dylan and Nova found themselves working around the clock to adapt the ritual for human participation while preserving its cultural significance. The hunt is too dangerous, Dylan argued during one planning session. We can't have humans facing off against Lurian wildlife. Nova's scales rippled in agreement. We change, make safe, but keep meaning. Their solution was to create a controlled environment where humans could demonstrate hunting skills using non-lethal weapons against robotic targets designed to mimic Lurian prey. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As they worked, Dylan couldn't help but notice the strain their new roles were putting on their relationship. Moments alone were rare, always interrupted by advisors or curious onlookers. One night, as they finally found a quiet moment together under the alien stars, Nova turned to him, her eyes shimmering with an emotion Dylan couldn't quite read. Dylan, she said softly, we different now. Always others watching, always working. Miss, just us. He reached out, running his fingers gently along her scales. I know, he replied, but what we're doing, it's important. We're changing the future for both our peoples. Nova leaned into his touch, a soft trill escaping her. Yes, important, but we important too. Their moment of intimacy was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Alara Voss, a human xenobiologist whose intense curiosity about their relationship had become a constant presence in their lives. Dylan, Nova, she called out, her voice brimming with barely held back excitement. I've been looking everywhere for you. I have a proposal that could change everything we know about human-Lurian compatibility. As Dr. Voss explained her idea for a comprehensive study of their relationship, Dylan felt Nova tense beside him. He understood her discomfort. The idea of their most private moments being dissected in the name of science was unsettling. Yet, as they listened to Dr. Voss's impassioned speech about the potential benefits for future human-Lurian couples, they found themselves reluctantly agreeing to participate. This could help others like us, Dylan said to Nova as Dr. Voss left, already planning her research protocol. Nova's scales shifted in a pattern Dylan had come to recognize as resignation. Yes, help others, but feel like specimen, not person. As they prepared for Dr. Voss's first round of examinations, news reached them of an unexpected development. A group of young Lurians, inspired by Dylan and Nova's relationship, had expressed their desire to participate in the human educational system. The request sent shockwaves through both communities. Conservative factions on both sides raised concerns about cultural preservation, while progressives saw it as the next logical step in integration. Dylan and Nova found themselves once again at the center of a storm, trying to mediate between conflicting viewpoints while preparing for the upcoming Lurian ceremony. As they worked, the pressure of their public roles continued to strain their personal connection. One evening, as they were finalizing plans for the ceremony, a young Lurian female named Zara approached them. Her scales shimmered with nervous energy as she spoke. Dylan, Nova, she said, her voice a mix of clicks and carefully practiced English. You show us new way, human and Lurian together. I want same. with human male. The implications of Zara's declaration hit Dylan like a physical force. He glanced at Nova, seeing his own shock reflected in her alien features. They had opened a door, and now others were following them through it. As Zara's announcement spread, the already tense atmosphere in both communities reached a boiling point. Dylan and Nova realized that the coming days would test not only the fragile peace between humans and Lurians, but also the very foundation of their own relationship. With the Lurian ceremony fast approaching and tensions rising on all sides, they knew they faced their greatest challenge yet. The future of human-Lurian relations hung in the balance, and they were at the very center of the storm. The future of human-Lurian relations hung in the balance, and they were at the very center of the maelstrom. The next morning, Dylan and Nova found themselves in Colonel Harding's office, facing a room full of tense faces. Chief Zorn's scales rippled with barely held back agitation, while Dr. Voss fidgeted with her data pad. "We need to address this immediately," Harding said, his voice grave. "Zara's announcement has sparked a firestorm of controversy." Nova's mandibles clicked softly. "Not expect this. Think only us special case." Dylan squeezed her hand gently. "We opened Pandora's box without realizing it." As they discussed potential solutions, a knock on the door interrupted them. A human aide entered, looking slightly flustered. "Sir, Ambassador Thalia Reeves has just arrived from Earth. She's requesting to join the meeting." Harding's eyebrows shot up. "Earth sent an ambassador? Let her in immediately." Ambassador Reeves strode into the room, her presence immediately commanding attention. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her piercing green eyes surveyed the room quickly. "Gentlemen, ladies," she nodded to Nova, "I understand we have a situation on our hands." As Reeves was briefed on the current state of affairs, Dylan couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and apprehension. Her expertise could be invaluable, but her presence also underscored the gravity of their situation. "We need a comprehensive plan," Reeves stated, her voice firm, "one that addresses the concerns of both species while promoting further integration." Over the next few hours, they hammered out the details of a new initiative: joint educational programs, cultural sensitivity training, and a specialized medical team to study interspecies couples were all part of the proposal. "And to demonstrate our commitment," Reeves added, looking at Dylan and Nova, "we need you two to undergo public medical examinations." Nova's scales flashed with surprise. Dylan felt his stomach tighten. "Public examinations?" he asked. Dr. Voss leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement. "It would be a groundbreaking study. We could learn so much about human-Lurian compatibility." Dylan glanced at Nova, seeing his own hesitation mirrored in her alien features. But they both knew what was at stake. "We'll do it," Nova said, her voice steady. As the meeting concluded, Dylan and Nova found themselves thrust into a whirlwind of activity. They spent the next few days shuttling between medical labs and cultural exchange events, barely finding a moment to themselves. The public examinations were particularly grueling. Dylan felt exposed as Dr. Voss and her Lurian counterparts poked and prodded, their findings displayed on large screens for all to see. "Fascinating," Dr. Voss murmured, studying a readout. "Dylan's cellular structure shows signs of adaptation. It's as if his body is gradually becoming more compatible with Lurian biology." Similar changes were observed in Nova, leading to excited speculation about the long-term effects of human-Lurian cohabitation. Meanwhile, preparations for the Lurian coming-of-age ceremony continued at a frantic pace. Dylan worked with the human security team, programming the holographic wildlife for the simulated hunt. "Make sure the hollow beasts are challenging but not impossible to catch," he instructed the tech team. "We want to test their skills, not frustrate them." Nova spent her time with the Lurian elders, carefully adapting the traditional rituals. "Must keep spirit," she explained to Dylan one evening. "Not just empty gestures." As they worked, a new movement began to take shape among the younger generations. A group of human and Lurian youths, inspired by Dylan and Nova, formed an interspecies cultural club. They organized mixed-species sporting events and art exhibitions, fostering friendships that crossed biological barriers. However, not everyone welcomed these changes. A group of conservative humans and Lurians, led by the recently released Sergeant Vance, began staging protests against what they called the dilution of pure culture. "We can't let aliens corrupt our way of life," Vance shouted at one rally, his face red with anger. To counter this narrative and showcase the benefits of cooperation, Dylan and Nova found themselves leading a joint human-Lurian expedition into unexplored Lurian territory. The team's diverse skills were put to the test when they encountered a previously unknown predatory species. "Watch out!" Dylan shouted, pushing a Lurian scientist out of the way as a massive six-legged creature burst from the underbrush. Nova's claws flashed as she leapt to defend her fellow expedition members. The incident proved to be a turning point. Human technology and Lurian instincts combined to neutralize the threat, demonstrating the potential of their alliance. As the day of the ceremony approached, the human settlement was transformed. Lurian decorations intertwined with human structures, creating a unique blend of both cultures. The adapted ritual hunt began at dawn. Mixed teams of human and Lurian youths set out into the holographic hunting grounds, their excitement palpable. Dylan watched from a control room as a human girl and her Lurian partner successfully tracked and captured a holographic prey animal. Their triumphant whoops echoed through the speakers. As night fell, the grand feast began. Tables groaned under the weight of dishes from both worlds. Humans cautiously sampled Lurian delicacies, while Lurians marveled at the variety of Earth cuisine. In a quiet corner, away from the celebrations, Dylan and Nova finally found a moment alone. The stress of recent weeks burdened immensely on them both. "Nova," Dylan said softly, reaching out to trace the pattern of her scales. "I've missed you." Nova leaned into his touch, a soft trill escaping her. "Missed you too. So much happening. So little time for us." Their eyes met and suddenly the noise of the feast faded away. Dylan pulled Nova close, their bodies fitting together in a now familiar embrace. As their lips met, Dylan felt the unique texture of Nova's alien skin, the slight vibration of her internal organs, sensations that had once seemed so foreign but now felt like home. Their passionate moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. They broke apart, breathing heavily, as an aide hurried towards them. "Dylan, Nova," the aide said, slightly out of breath. "We've just received word. High-ranking officials from Earth and the Lurian homeworld are on their way to Luros. They want to assess our progress personally." Dylan and Nova exchanged a look, the weight of their responsibility settling back on their shoulders. The future of human-Lurian relations would be decided in the coming days, and they knew their actions would be crucial in shaping the outcome. As they made their way back to the feast, hand in hand, Dylan couldn't help but wonder what new challenges awaited them. The path ahead was uncertain, but with Nova by his side, he felt ready to face whatever might come. "Come." Their hands clasped tightly, they stepped back into the bustling feast, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The news of the impending diplomatic visit spread like wildfire through the human settlement and Lurian communities. Dylan and Nova found themselves thrust into a whirlwind of preparations, their days filled with meetings, planning sessions, and endless rounds of coordination. "We need to showcase everything we've achieved," Dylan said, poring over a holographic map of the settlement. "Every success, every collaboration, every step forward we've made together." Nova nodded, her scales shimmering with perseverance. "Must show true integration, not just surface level. Deep connection between our peoples." They worked tirelessly, pushing themselves to the limit. The newly constructed hybrid city center became a focal point of their efforts. Human engineers and Lurian architects had collaborated to create a marvel that blended the best of both worlds. Sleek human technology intertwined with the organic, flowing designs favored by Lurians. As the day of the delegation's arrival dawned, a palpable tension filled the air. Dylan stood before a mirror, adjusting his formal uniform. Nova approached him from behind, her clawed hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Ready?" she asked, her alien features softening with concern. Dylan took a deep breath, covering her hand with his own. "As ready as we'll ever be. Let's go make history." They made their way to the landing pad, joining the assembled greeting party. The roar of engines filled the air as two ships descended, one bearing the insignia of Earth, the other adorned with the intricate patterns of the Lurian homeworld. Dylan and Nova stood at the forefront, their hands intertwined. As the ship's doors opened, they stepped forward together. Earth's president emerged first, a tall woman with steel-gray hair and piercing blue eyes. She was followed closely by the Lurian High Counselor, his scales a deep regal purple. "Welcome to Luros," Dylan and Nova said in unison, their voices blending human words and Lurian clicks. The president's eyebrows rose slightly, while the High Counselor's mandibles twitched in what Dylan had learned to recognize as surprise. "Impressive," the president said, her gaze moving from Dylan to Nova and back again. "I see the reports of your unique partnership were not exaggerated." The High Counselor clicked softly. "Indeed. Most intriguing." As they led the delegation on a tour of the settlement, Dylan and Nova took turns highlighting the achievements of their integrated community. They showcased the joint educational facilities, where human children were learning Lurian hunting techniques alongside young Lurians operating advanced human technology. "And here," Dylan said, gesturing to a state-of-the-art laboratory, "is where our joint scientific expedition made its groundbreaking discoveries." The expedition team presented their findings on Luros's ecosystem and the new predatory species they had encountered. The president and High Counselor listened intently, their expressions a mix of fascination and cautious approval. As evening fell, they gathered for a formal dinner in the Grand Hall of the Hybrid City Center. The atmosphere was tense, with representatives from both species eyeing each other warily. Midway through the meal, Sergeant Vance stood up, his face flushed with terrifying anger. "This is all well and good," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "But how do we know this isn't just an elaborate charade, a political stunt to push an agenda of so-called integration that will only dilute our cultures?" A murmur of agreement rose from some of the more conservative members of both delegations. Dylan felt Nova tense beside him, her scales rippling with agitation. Before he could respond, Nova rose to her feet. "Not charade," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Not stunt. Is real. Is love." She paused, her alien eyes meeting Dylan's. "Is family." A hush fell over the room as Nova placed a hand on her abdomen. "I carry Dylan's child," she announced. "New life. Blend of human and Lurian. Proof of true unity." Gasps and exclamations filled the air. Dr. Voss, who had been quietly observing from a corner, stepped forward. "It's true," she confirmed, her voice trembling with excitement. "Our earlier examinations showed subtle biological changes in both Dylan and Nova. This pregnancy, while unexpected, is a natural result of those changes." The room erupted into chaos. Debates broke out at every table, with voices raised in excitement, disbelief, and concern. Dylan stood, raising his hands for silence. "Listen to me, please," he said, his voice cutting through the din. "This child, our child, is not a threat to either of our cultures. It's not about dilution or loss. It's about growth, about creating something new while honoring where we came from." Nova joined him, her hand finding his. "We love both worlds," she added. "Child will know Earth stories, Lurian songs, will be bridge between our peoples." Their words seemed to resonate with many in the room. The president and High Counselor exchanged a long look before rising from their seats. "We need to discuss this development," the president announced. "If you'll excuse us." As they left the room, Dylan and Nova found themselves surrounded by well-wishers and curious onlookers. Questions flew at them from all directions, but before they could answer, the doors reopened. The president and High Counselor returned, their faces solemn but their eyes bright with purpose. "After careful consideration," the president began, "we have come to a decision." The High Counselor continued, his mandibles clicking rhythmically. "Luros will become official pilot planet for human-Lurian integration. Program may expand to other worlds if successful." A cheer went up from the pro-integration faction, while others looked on with uncertainty. "Furthermore," the president added, "we are establishing an interspecies diplomatic academy here on Luros, and we can think of no better leaders for this institution than the two individuals who have shown us the true potential of our peoples working together." She turned to Dylan and Nova, a smile breaking through her official demeanor. "That is, if you're willing to take on the challenge. Dylan looked at Nova, seeing his own mix of shock and willpower reflected in her alien features. They nodded in unison. "We accept," Dylan said, his voice firm. As the announcement sank in and congratulations poured in from all sides, Dylan and Nova found a moment of quiet amidst the chaos. They stood by a window overlooking the hybrid city they had helped create, its lights twinkling against the backdrop of Lurus's twin moons. "Ready for new adventure?" Nova asked, her hand resting protectively over her abdomen. Dylan pulled her close, feeling the subtle vibration of her internal organs, a sensation that had once seemed alien but now felt like home. "With you?" "Always," he replied, his lips brushing against her scaled forehead. As they turned back to face the crowd, ready to begin the next chapter of their journey, the future stretched out before them, a future filled with challenges, but also with the promise of a new era of understanding between their peoples.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.